Every war, every heartbreak, every lost decade of your life begins with a silence. Not the silence around you, the silence inside you. The silence of the parts you weren't allowed to be. The voice you buried so deep it now speaks in symptoms, insomnia, sabotage, that sinking feeling you can't explain. And all of it whispers the same thing: something is missing. Not in the world, in you. Carl Jung called it the shadow, the parts of ourselves we push away to survive in a world that only rewards the parts it finds acceptable. He warned, everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the conscious life, the blacker and denser it is. And what you refuse to face doesn't disappear. It directs your life and calls itself fate. You were never taught this. You were taught to be good, to be bright, to be safe. And in the name of being lovable, you amputated the parts of you that were wild or angry or real. The irony. The more perfect you became, the more disconnected you felt. Because the shadow doesn't die in darkness, it waits. It becomes the echo in your relationships, the tension behind your smile, the hollowness in your wins. And the moment you say, "That's not me," it begins to live as someone else. This is the warning. Not of some storm coming from the sky. The warning is already here, inside the mirror. Because what we deny in ourselves, we outsource, we scapegoat, we weaponize. The thing you will not face in yourself becomes the thing you hate in others. You think you're fighting for justice, but you're avoiding your own shame. You think you're defending peace, but you're projecting the war you've never made peace with inside. Jung wrote that the world will ask you who you are, and if you don't know, it will tell you. But here's what he didn't say. If you refuse to face your shadow, the world won't just tell you who you are. It will show you what happens when a soul is split. It will use your unexamined parts to define your enemies, your lovers, your beliefs, your destruction. So ask yourself, what part of you have you buried so deeply you no longer recognize it? What if the very thing you're ashamed of is the part of you that holds the key to your wholeness? This isn't just your life we're talking about. This is how civilizations collapse. If the shadow is not brought to light, it becomes the fire. The shadow isn't your flaw, it's your fullness. It's not the monster under the bed. It's the version of you that had to go into hiding to survive. It holds the words you couldn't say, the boundaries you weren't allowed to set, the tears you were punished for crying, the power you tucked beneath a smile so you could stay safe. The shadow isn't evil, it's just not allowed. And the longer it stays in exile, the more it haunts you. It doesn't just live in memory, it lives in your body, in the clenching jaw, the held breath, the patterns that repeat, the outbursts that don't make sense, the panic that strikes at 3 a.m., whispering things you don't want to hear. Jung warned, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. That's not poetic, that's precise. Think about it. Have you ever hated someone for being too loud, too proud, too sensitive? What if they were just expressing the part of you that never got permission to exist? You're not reacting to them. You're reacting to the version of yourself you were told to kill. This is projection. And projection is where the shadow hides best. You don't just suppress it, you project it onto your child, your partner, your enemies, your country. You call it morality, but it's a mirror. And someone always ends up paying for what we refuse to feel. In Japanese folklore, a sailor at sea was confronted by a spirit demanding, name the most horrible thing you know. He didn't say war, he didn't say death. He said, my profession, and the spirit vanished. Because it wasn't a ghost that haunted him, it was truth. In Zulu mythology, the Tokoloshi is a shape-shifting night creature, unseen but unmistakable. It only visits those who carry something they haven't faced. It doesn't bite, it reveals. And it only comes for those still hiding from themselves. I once heard a therapist share this. A man came to her with recurring panic attacks. shaking, hyperventilating, feeling like he was dying. No trauma he could name, no obvious cause. Just a slow burn that erupted at night. It wasn't until their fourth session that he remembered something. At 8 years old, he found out his mother died by overhearing it through a closed door. No one had told him. He cried once, then never again. The panic attacks. They began the same week his daughter turned 8. What we repress does not forget us. It waits in the basement of the psyche, holding its breath. And when we finally slow down enough to listen, not fix, not deny, just listen, it speaks. It says, "You left me there." It says, "I'm still hurting." It says, "Please don't abandon me again." That is not weakness, that is intelligence. The shadow has always been your system's way of holding what your conscious mind could not carry. It is not your failure, it is your survival. And now it wants integration. You don't heal the shadow by erasing it. You heal it by turning toward it. By saying, "I'm ready to remember." By giving voice to what you thought would ruin you. And what you'll find is this: it was never trying to ruin you. It was trying to make you real. What you refuse to face in yourself, you will fight in someone else. And what you suppress long enough becomes the very thing you fear in the world. Jung didn't just describe the shadow as a personal burden. He saw it as a cultural time bomb. He warned that when a person does not deal with their shadow, they project it. And when a society refuses to deal with its collective shadow, it begins to implode. He wrote, "Projections change the world into the replica of one's own unknown face." This isn't metaphor. It's how people ruin their marriages in the name of control. It's how tribes turn into mobs. It's how empires fall while calling themselves the chosen. You see someone who's loud and you judge them for a voice you were never allowed to use. You hate the arrogant, but it's the confidence you were told was dangerous. You attack the narcissist, but what you're really attacking is the part of you that still wants to be seen. Projection is not personal, it's mechanical. The psyche offloads what it cannot accept. And when that offloading becomes normalized, when everyone is carrying a mirror and calling it a weapon, we call it politics, we call it culture, we call it justice. But it's still the shadow hunting its reflection. And there is a paradox here that no one wants to name. The more righteous a society believes it is, the more violently it punishes what it cannot face in itself. In 1603, in Fulda, Germany, a woman named Merga Bien was executed for witchcraft. She was pregnant, educated, unmarried, and outspoken. That was enough. A society that could not accept its own fears and contradictions found a scapegoat, and it burned her. This isn't history. This is prophecy. Because we do the same thing today, just with new labels. We cancel instead of crucify. We mock instead of exile. We shame instead of stone. But the function is the same: purge what threatens the illusion. Jung said, if you do not bring your shadow into the light, it will rule your life. But if you project it outward, it will rule the world. And when enough people do that, the world becomes a mirror none of us recognize. Some say the solution is to build better systems, more accountability, more rules. But rules don't save you from your unconscious. Only awareness can do that. Only the courage to say, that hatred I carry, it's mine. That fear I project, it started with me. That pattern I condemn, I've played it too. Without this reckoning, the future will not be a new chapter. It will be an echo. And in that echo we will mistake our own face for the enemy. This is the warning to the world. Not of fire, not of war, but of the human heart, untouched by its own reflection. The descent never begins with courage. It begins with collapse. You think you're healing, but really you're unraveling. Your tools stop working. The tricks that kept you safe, the pleasing, the numbing, the performing, lose their magic. And in their absence, the silence comes. And in that silence, something begins to rise. You thought awakening would feel like light, but it feels like falling. This is not regression, it is not weakness. It is the shadow knocking louder. And descent is the only way through. Jung compared it to the ancient hero's journey into the underworld, into the cave, not to defeat a monster, but to recover what was lost. But the monster is not a beast. It is grief, rage, memory, and in the beginning it looks like madness. Some traditions say there is no shadow at all, that the darkness is illusion, that enlightenment is the dissolution of stories. But in this cave, those stories bleed. The body remembers what the mind erased. And the only illusion is that you could ever outrun what lives inside you. The cave is not punishment, it's invitation. And so you begin to descend. You remember what you forgot. The first time your boundaries were broken. The first time your body was shamed. The first time you learned that love required silence. And the body holds score. You lose your appetite. You stop sleeping. You react to things that shouldn't hurt and feel nothing when they should. You're not broken. You're finally honest. In Zulu myth, the Tokoloshe returns night after night to those who keep pretending. But when named, truly named, it vanishes. It was never a demon. It was your story begging to be told. I once heard a therapist describe a woman who began unraveling the year her daughter turned 13. She had panic attacks, violent dreams, unexplainable dread. Only through deep work did she remember at 13 she was assaulted. She was told never to speak of it. And so her body did the remembering for her. The panic wasn't random, it was timed. The shadow knew exactly when to speak. That is what this descent reveals. The parts of you that you exiled were not dead, they were patient, waiting for the moment you'd finally be strong enough to hear them. You do not heal by rising. You heal by going down, into the ache, into the breathlessness, into the memory you swore you'd never relive. And in that dark, you find not only pain but clarity. You see your entire life as it is, not as you wanted it to be, not as you performed it to be, but bare. And in that bareness, you stop lying. You stop protecting your image. You stop editing your truth. And the shadow, it softens, because it no longer has to shout to be heard. This is not transcendence, this is embodiment. This is you for the first time sitting with what was never allowed to speak. And in that stillness you realize the cave was never the danger. The real danger was believing you didn't need to go in. Not everything that's buried is meant to stay buried. Some things wait, not to haunt you, but to return you. And the shadow, once seen, once heard, once held, begins to show its true face. Not a monster, not a saboteur, but a protector, a record keeper of every part of you you had to disown to stay loved, to stay safe, to stay alive. The paradox is this: the shadow isn't the wound. It's the survival. The anger you suppressed became your spine. The sensitivity you were mocked for became your ability to feel the room. The parts of you labeled too much were actually the map back to your original strength. Hillman said, the shadow is not just a moral problem, it is a problem of love. How far can our love extend to the broken and ruined parts of ourselves? That is the question, because the descent does not end with clarity. It ends with a choice. You can see your shadow and still try to manage it. You can intellectualize it, spiritualize it, medicate it, but until you choose to love it, to grieve for it, to thank it, it does not release you. Integration is not a moment. It's a practice, and in that practice, something changes. You begin to speak without performing. You listen without defending. You cry without explanation. You remember the wisdom of the body. You let go of being polished in favor of being present. The same shame that used to run your life, now it teaches you where your deepest longing lives. The anxiety that used to grip your chest? It becomes a compass for when you're abandoning yourself again. The grief you avoided? It becomes your capacity for compassion because now you recognize it in others. You've stopped trying to be light, and in doing so, you've become whole. The tokoloshi doesn't return because you no longer pretend. The cave is no longer a prison because you've made peace with the dark. The projection dissolves because you've called back what you once threw away. There is nothing to fix, there is only what you're ready to feel. And what you finally understand is this: you do not become free by killing the shadow. You become free by carrying it, with honesty, with humility, with grace. Not dragging it behind you, not shoving it down again, but walking side by side. You're not healed, you're not finished. But you're no longer hiding from yourself. And in a world addicted to image, that is its own kind of revolution. Because when you embrace your shadow, you become the kind of person who doesn't need to project anymore. You become the place where the cycle breaks. And that's how the world begins to change. Not through systems, but through people who've come home to themselves. What happens when the war within ends? Not silence, not serenity, but space. Space to speak without pretending, to love without bargaining, to rest without guilt. To walk through the world no longer divided against yourself, because what you've integrated can no longer control you. And what you've owned, no one else can use against you. This is what Jung called individuation, not becoming perfect, but becoming whole. Becoming real, the self no longer haunted by its shadow, but illuminated by it. But this isn't just personal. This is where the warning becomes collective. Because if you won't face your shadow, someone else will be forced to. If you won't feel your grief, your children will carry it. If you won't own your shame, your community will perform it. If you won't confront your rage, it will elect leaders who act it out for you. This is not philosophy, this is history. This is now. The world is not just shaped by the systems we build. It is shaped by the parts of ourselves we will not look at. And when enough people reject their own darkness, they create cultures of cruelty dressed as clarity. They create religions obsessed with purity and punishment. They create nations that kill what they cannot name. Rumi said, "Don't turn away. Keep your gaze on the bandaged place. That's where the light enters you." But most people do turn away, because looking hurts. But not looking costs more. Because the more you repress, the more you project. The more you deny, the more you destroy. And so the choice comes, not once, but every day. Will you look? Will you sit with what you've silenced? Will you reclaim what you've outsourced? Because the shadow doesn't vanish, it waits. And now it waits no longer. This is the warning to the world, not of apocalypse, but of avoidance. Of what happens when generations bury what was never meant to be buried. Of what happens when nations mistake their shadow for enemies and fire for truth, but there's another path. It begins with one question: what part of you did you abandon to survive? Name it, feel it, let it come home. And if this voice echoed something you've felt but never named, leave it below. Say the thing you've never said. Say the part of you you've never spoken aloud. Because every time someone speaks from their shadow, the world becomes a little more honest, a little less afraid, and a little more whole.